We all know about the French Revolution Part 1, and we know about the Reign of Terror, or Revolution Part 2, but I'm betting a lot of you don't know what happened in between then. The Reconstruction period in France lasted between 1790 and 1792, and attempted to reform France in accordance with the demands of the bourgeoisie. Clearly, it wasn't so effective. Today we're going to focus on the short-lived Constitution of 1791, its influences, content, and why it didn't work.
The French Constitution was presented by the National Constituent Assembly and reluctantly accepted by the King on September 13, 1791. The Constitution was founded on many of the liberal principles previously established in the Declaration of the Rights of Man. In fact, the Declaration would become the preamble of the new Constitution.
The core inspirations for the Constitution of 1791 were Enlightenment philosophers. Quote, "A state also of equality, wherein all the power and jurisdiction is reciprocal, no one having more than another, there being nothing more evident than that creatures of the same species and rank, promiscuously born to all the same advantages of nature, and the use of the same faculties, should also be equal one amongst another without subordination or subjection." End quote. This passage originates from the Enlightenment philosopher John Locke's Second Treatise of Civil Government. Here, Locke argues for absolute equality unless one has a divine right toward dominion and sovereignty. In the Constitution's preamble, it states the purpose of the Constitution as one that abolishes irrevocably the institutions which were injurious to liberty and equality of rights, clearly inspired by Locke's ideal of a state of equality. Additionally, the preamble continues to disavow any superiority other than that of public functionaries in the performance of their duties, echoing Locke's statement that men should be equal one amongst another without subordination or subjection. Additionally, the Constitution of 1791 maintained the presence of King Louis XVI, but transitioned from an absolute monarchy to a constitutional monarchy. In Section 3, it is written, "The government is monarchical. The executive power is delegated to the king, to be exercised under his authority by ministers and other responsible agents in the manner hereinafter determined." Despite the fact that the very nature of monarchy is unequal, Locke himself allows for it in his second treatise. He maintains absolute equality unless the lord and master of them all should, by any manifest declaration of his will, set one above another, and confer on him, by an evident and clear appointment, an undoubted right to dominion and sovereignty. The king is excused from absolute equality due to the fact that God made an evident and clear appointment that provides an exception from the equality discussed in the Constitution.
The new system of government aimed to uphold rational administration, unregulated economic freedom, anti-clericism, and the protection of property. It also limited those who had no claim to property, including women and the impoverished. Under the Constitution, a legislative assembly was formed. Replacing the king, it served as a major political authority. Although the king remained the head of the government, it was the legislative assembly that held the power to make laws. Furthermore, the king's political power was well regulated under the Constitution. He had limited veto power regarding new legislation and needed the consent of the assembly to declare war. While the assembly was a step up in terms of more power in the hands of the people, it fell short of meeting the needs of the vast majority. The new role of the assembly was built to service and employ the bourgeoisie, and although the king had even more limitations on his power, the monarchy was still very much a reality. This shortcoming would later lead to the Reign of Terror.
While the National Constituent Assembly attempted to aid Reconstruction, the new policies of economic freedom disappointed a majority of citizens, specifically the peasants and urban workers. On June 14, 1791, the Assembly stopped any and all attempts for urban workers to establish a guild, because the Assembly had agreed to suppress all guilds. By doing this, it showed that the Assembly opposed the new values of political and social individualism that the people wanted. The Assembly did not help the financial crisis, especially because the royal debt that was owed to many people in the Third Estate was not repaid. In an attempt to take care of the debt, the Assembly decided to take possession of the Roman Catholic Church in France and sell its property. However, all this did was lead to greater inflation and religious divide. Also in an attempt to diminish the growing debt, the Assembly issued government bonds that, while effective at first, ended up causing inflation to increase when more were issued and the price began to fall. Instead of reducing debt as the Assembly had hoped, this resulted in more stress for the poor. There were many indirect taxes that the people hated, and the Assembly tried to help by replacing them with new land taxes. However, these proved ineffective because there were not enough officials to collect the money owed, and therefore the taxes could not be imposed. Finally, the Constitution divided the French people into two categories of citizens: active citizens and passive citizens. Approximately 61% of male citizens became what was considered an active citizen, and these were the only people who were allowed to vote, angering the rest of the population.
The French Constitution of 1791 brought up many issues within French society that made it very difficult for some people to have individual rights. One of the largest issues that women faced in the 1971 French Constitution was that they were given the title of being a passive citizen, a person who did not own property and could not vote, however, were protected by the law with relation to their belongings and liberty. The Constitution defined a citizen as being born in France to a French father, being born in France of a foreign father and having established their residence in France, being born in a foreign country of a French father and declaring your residence in France. The other two branches of citizens were active citizens and electors. Active citizens were tax-paying men who could vote. Electors were a group of men who could vote and choose new legislators, also men. Because of this new system, it was impossible for women to vote or hold office. This created an unequal and unjust society for all women. In 1971, Marie Gouge, who wrote under the pen name Olympe de Gouges, was also a prominent revolutionary in Paris, compiled a Declaration of the Rights of Women, which mirrored the Declaration of the Rights of Man of 1789. Within this reaction to the rights of man in the Constitution, she outlined key issues that women should have: the right to own property, requiring men to recognize the paternity of their children, equality in marriage, and improved education. In the words of Olympe de Gouges, regardless of what barriers you, it is in your power to free yourselves. You only have to want it. Despite this comforting sentiment, Olympe never became an active citizen and was unable to free herself from the Constitution's barriers.
The Constitution was a failure in many ways. It was unable to shake the reign of King Louis XVI, as the Genevan political writer Attente Dumont wrote. The Constitution was a veritable monster. There was too much republic for a monarchy and too much monarchy for a republic. It did nothing to aid the crippling debt that ailed the French citizens. It excluded 39% of males from being active citizens and barred women altogether. Despite the idyllic statements of the preamble, inspired by Enlightenment thinkers, it failed to live up to the words of philosophers like John Locke, and led to one of the bloodiest periods of violence in French history.